Okay. Welcome to the April 3rd, 2017 meeting of the Select Board. Reminding everybody that our meeting is being both broadcast and recorded. The first order of business this evening is a consent agenda, which includes town accountant's warrant, gift acceptance from Concord Carlisle Community Chest of $10,000 for crisis intervention training for the Concord police officers. That's very generous, and thank you very much. One-day special licenses, 2 for Saltbox Farm on April 24th and May 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. at 40 Westford Road, a wine and malt beverage only. 51 Walden Street, the 29th of April from 7 to 10 p.m. at 775 Monument Street, also a wine and malt beverage. In Concord Academy, April 30th from 4 to 8 p.m. at 166 Main Street, also wine and malt. And it's a request of the owner, an extension of hours for Saltbox Kitchen on April 22nd, May 1st, and June 10th until 10:30 p.m. with the last call at 10 p.m. and that is at 84 Commonwealth Avenue.
Move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next item on the agenda is the town manager's report. Town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Public Works Department responded to the all-day snowstorm on Saturday, so we were just about level budget, fully expended, so we've gone into the red now on the snow and ice account by about $30,000 or so if it stops now. But appreciation to the Public Works folks. It was heavy, wet snow. It was kind of hard to move. The Paramount Films is in town this week and next and the following week, filming Daddy's Home 2, mostly setting up this week, I think, doing a little bit of filming. You can see the scene constructed on the church on Walden Street, and they have vehicles parked at the landfill, at the Kais Road Public Works site, and I think at the high school also, so they're all around. Let me see, we are taking down the cash box in the West Concord commuter parking lot, and that will no longer be utilized, and it will be a pay-by-phone only arrangement. That's where you would fold your dollar bills, and the town staff had to unfold thousands of $1 bills. So that tradition is ending. The treasurer's office is pleased. So it's pay-by-phone only in the MBTA parking lot in West Concord as of this week. The Planning Board's meeting tomorrow night, April 4th, to provide its recommendation on the Junction Village project, and the Board of Appeals meets the following week on the 13th, I think it is, to continue the discussion of the Junction Village application. The Free Public Library held its first technology fair on Saturday, showing people how to use their Wi-Fi, streaming media, and a variety of other things. The Girls Who Code group was there, so there's a lot of things. About 100 people came to the first one, and they hope to do it again next year. And finally, the Holy Family Church, our parish, has accepted our offer. Formally, they've signed the acceptance offer. So to purchase the property at 55 Church Street. Town meeting will consider that at the end of the month, but we'll be working now on a purchase and sale agreement too. Pardon? At the price agreed upon, and you'll recall, they originally had wanted to stay in the building longer, and they'll be vacating at the time of closing.
Great.
Now the anticipated closing date,
Mid-July, around the 15th, perhaps.
and that will give us a sufficient time to do the renovation so that
Yes. Yep.
we coordinated.
Yep.
Assuming town meeting.
Assuming town meeting funds the project.
Well, that's good news. Excellent. Any questions for the town manager?
I have one. West Concord has gone to all pay by phone, right?
Yes, the commuter parking lot, not the on-street part, the on-street parking
Yeah,
lot,
but
the
the
commuter.
commuter parking lot.
Yep.
Are there plans, or could there be plans to install pay by phone at the Crosby lot? There's a lot of interest for folks who don't commute every day to have the option.
I believe Marcia is looking at that. That's also planned for the area in front of Concord Academy on Main Street. It's not yet in, so I think as part of that phase 2, they did not want to have the meters, so they favored the pay-by-phone. Some signs that will go with pay-by-phone.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. The next item on the agenda is Estabrook Woods update. Dear? This setup, for those who don't know, is where you had Estabrook Woods Access Committee. With some, in effect, they made a report, recommendations was put in place by the board, and with that, there were a lot of actions that needed to be taken, and so it fell in Ms. Kay's lap, so welcome, we're glad you're here.
Thank you. Glad to be here. So, as you know, on January 9th, 2017, the Select Board adopted many of the recommendations that the Estabrook Woods Study Access Committee put forth. And many of those recommendations have been moving forward, and I'm just here to give you a sort of progress report on where things stand. There were two primary recommendations that the Select Board adopted, and the first was around the town working to resolve the legal uncertainties at Estabrook Road, and we're waiting for Town Council's review and analysis of title and other investigations. The second main recommendation was that the town work with the trustees of reservations to develop a low-key parking area at the Apthorpe land in an effort to get parking off Monument Street to access Punkatassett. Representatives from the Select Board and the Natural Resources Commission met with the trustees in late January to discuss a shared stewardship proposal in exchange for this parking arrangement on the Apthorpe land. And trustees of reservations representatives also attended the March 1st NRC meeting to discuss how that shared stewardship, what that shared stewardship would look like. And while we think that there's some positive elements that could come forth from a shared stewardship proposal, the NRC also wasn't completely sure that the NRC and trustees' stewardship objectives lined up 100%, and so they decided to evaluate other alternative parking options on Punkatassett itself. And initially, when the Estabrook Woods Study Committee had met, this was sort of looking at what parking might look like inside, well inside Punkatassett. But what the NRC has done at this point is to evaluate the accessway itself, which varies in width from 28 feet at Monument Street, and it widens out to about 50 feet just past the Apthorpe house. And so to look at parking along that accessway itself. And they have not discussed the parking alternatives yet, but they will be reviewing those at their April 19th meeting. But the preliminary plans that have come in do indicate that parking along the Punkatassett entranceway would be a feasible alternative option to parking on the Apthorpe parcel. The Select Board also had adopted a number of the recommendations around use of the woods, and this was really looking to have the landowners around Estabrook come up with some consistent guidelines to really kind of capture what the appropriate use was around Estabrook. And these were supported by the Select Board. And in mid-February, the major landowners met to discuss the proposed guidelines. And these look very similar to what the committee had put forward to the Select Board. And Neil Rasmussen has developed some signage that is in draft form right now. I can share these with the board. And if anybody in the public is interested in seeing what these look like. There would be three separate signs. This one that I've provided you with is for Punkatassett itself. I think it's in this one, yeah. So this one would be specific to Punkatassett. The one at the Land Trust property would mention that it is Chamberlain Woods, and the signs for the private landowners would just state that it was private land. And these capture the recommendations that were discussed by the Estabrook Woods Access Committee. There is one or two changes. One is a major change that was the committee had not recommended that dogs be leashed throughout the woods, and that discussion has sort of evolved since the committee met and the Select Board met to discuss this. And I think there's a number of different things that are happening here. One of them is that other communities around Concord are imposing regulations around dogs that are stricter than what Concord has. And so we're seeing dogs from other communities that are coming in. There's also obviously the concern with Estabrook and its nature, perceived nature on the web as a regional dog park. So the landowners that met in February to discuss these were all sort of generally in favor of these guidelines. The NRC obviously has to go through a bit more of a process around that. They will be holding a separate meeting or a public meeting on May 11th to discuss these restrictions and signage, and also also restrictions on leashing dogs at some of the other conservation lands that are experiencing some problems. So the landowners may move forward a little bit more quickly. The private landowners, Middlesex already actually has a leash restriction. I don't think it's posted anywhere, but they don't allow dogs on Middlesex lands without a leash. But the intention was that everybody has sort of similar guidelines, provided the NRC is on board with these guidelines.
Julia, let me ask you, since the leashing was not part of the recommendations of the select board meeting, are we going to need to come revisit that, or is that something that falls under your jurisdiction?
That would fall under just the general rules and regulations that the NRC can impose on conservation lands. Yes, correct. Similar to what the NRC did 2 years ago around White Pond with the concern around erosion. They just had a public meeting. It was noticed in the Journal with a legal notice, and there was a conversation about it. This will elevate this a little bit. We plan to post notices at some of the more heavily used town lands so that there's more awareness around that discussion. But the NRC does have that ability to impose whatever rules it feels are appropriate to steward the land. Mr. Rasmussen has offered to pay for development of the signs, and private landowners would be responsible for installing the signs on their properties, and the conservation crew that is in the Natural Resources Office would install these pending NRC approval in early summer at Punkatasset. There's also a recommendation that there be some better education around Estabrook Woods because of the misconception that Estabrook is primarily public, which, as the select board knows, the majority of the land is private land. And so there's a few different efforts that are happening around this education. Neil Rasmussen is developing a website, and we're also, in my office, developing a history of Estabrook Woods, and it's really looking all the way back to the beginning when Gordon Hutchins sold some of his land to Harvard as a nature preserve, and then going forward on all the subsequent efforts that other landowners and residents have made to sort of weave this tapestry of protected lands around the Harvard 672-acre core of Estabrook Woods. So that information, once we have that developed, we would want to put that up at kiosks. We're going to take down the kiosk that's at Punkatasset from the 70s. That was sentimental value, but it's probably time for that to be replaced with something a little bit more in keeping with the kiosks that we've been putting up at Sparrott's Mill and Reformatory Branch. And along those lines, the Land Trust is also working on a kiosk for Chamberlain Woods, where we could put this history. The map that is, the town developed a map a few years ago, sort of taking the old 70s Estabrook map, overlaying it onto some of the trails that we were aware of. There are some inaccuracies with those trails that Peter Siebert from the Trails Committee is updating right now. Once that trail map is updated, that would also go into the kiosk and replace the one that's on our website. The history would also be placed on our website. Another recommendation around Monument Farm was made and adopted by the Select Board. Monument Farm has about a 15-acre piece of conservation land that surrounds the Monument Farm's development, provides a buffer to Estabrook Woods, and there was a recommendation that a small parking area of 3 to 5 spaces be placed within that road there. And I have received an opinion from Town Council that although that road is private, there is a use that is allowed by the owners of the Monument Farm's houses as well as Concord residents to use that road in a manner which roads would be used in the town of Concord, and Town Council agreed that parking would be within those uses. And so I'll be setting up a meeting with the landowners in the next couple of weeks, as well as Harvard and the town of Carlisle, to talk about putting in a small parking area that would be within the shoulder. And we'd put up a small conservation trail parking sign there just to sort of illuminate to the people, to the public, where that is. There is an existing trail that is on that property. It was not adopted by the select board that that be relocated onto town property. We do have that flagged if we want to do that in the future, but we have secured an agreement with the landowner on whose land that trail falls for the public to use that. We have a lot of these agreements, written agreements that are revocable, and so we do have that arrangement with the landowner at Monument Farms for that trail. Chamberlain Woods, there was a recommendation from the committee that the trailhead sign be removed and replaced with something a little bit more rustic. The town has taken that sign down, and the land trust is working to develop a sign that's more in keeping with the other conservation land signs around town. And plowing was another recommendation that was discussed. We've never had a formal agreement on plowing, and this year has been the only year that it's actually ever become an issue that I've been aware of, more than one call or something like that. We are working with Public Works to develop an agreement on which conservation lands would be plowed, and I'll be providing them with a map. This would be something that we would have geared for next winter, and it's really with an understanding that when we have these storms, that roads and sidewalks and parking lots are the first priority, and that conservation lands would be done at some point after that, 48 hours or 72 hours after the conclusion of a storm. But something in place just so that there is that public access being provided to the town's conservation lands. So that's a quick update on where things are. We still have some work to do. But I did want to let you know that we are working towards implementing those recommendations.
Well, that's terrific and good progress, so thanks very much, Julie. You have questions?
I have a couple. Is there any handicap parking planned?
What we're looking at Punkatassett is to include one handicap parking spot.
And I noticed on the sign, no motorized vehicles. The Bruce Friedman, they had that, and then they altered to allow for motorized wheelchairs.
Yes.
And I assume there could be an exception on that.
We would always make that exception, and if we can fit it into the sign, I think that would be
I think it would be helpful if it could be.
I think it would too.
Thank you.
So what's next? Are you going to come back to us again with not just a further update, but any actions we might have to take in support of what you're trying to do?
I think my goal was to sort of give you an update of where things are now, and so that information is not just sort of happening in a vacuum.
No, that's greatly appreciated.
As far as next steps that the select board would need to take, there's none that are jumping out at me that are action items that the select board would need to take, with the exception of the Estabrook Road issue with the legal access. There may be some actions that
Well, I
select
would
board.
encourage you, first, thanks very much. It's terrific that we've made some progress. But I would encourage you to come back again. This was a significant set of activities for the town, and there was a lot to be done. So I think if you could.
I would be happy to do that. I'd love to come back to you sometime midsummer and say all of this is in place.
Is it possible that the parking at Monument Farm could actually get done in a relatively short period of time?
Yes, I think it is possible that could happen in a relatively short period of time.
Depends on the term relative.
What I'm envisioning is that it would not be any, significant regrading or anything like that, that it would just be off-the-shoulder parking, similar to, what we have for other conservation lands. It is a wide,
Not a whole lot different than Chamberlain on Ave, on Lowell.
on Lowell Road, right, yes.
And it certainly wouldn't be more than 5 spots.
No. The recommendation was for 3 to 5, and I think most people's feeling is that is going to be either a winter parking or an overflow parking. So I would recommend that it starts, it's smaller, 3 to 4, and then if it needs to be anything larger, it, can be reevaluated.
And the public hearing on May 11th,
Mhm.
what, how can we make sure that that's well
Noticed.
noticed,
The commission has been talking about opportunities for that, and there will be a legal notice that goes into the journal. We'll be developing some language that's posted at Madison, Barrett's Mill, Punkatasset, areas that have high dog use.
right,
Just to inform people that there will be this public meeting to discuss leash restrictions at some of the conservation lands.
and maybe some background on why, why Concord is looking at
Right.
taking this step.
Right. Yes, and we're sort of going through, and there's a lot of literature that's been, put together over the past number of years that will have that available in a handout for people, just, what the citations are if people want to look that up. But yes, we'll include reasoning on why the NRC has considered these restrictions.
I hope, well, thanks to you, and I hope you will convey our thanks and gratitude to all the folks who have been working with you, the neighbors and other members of your staff and the land trust for your cooperation.
I sure will.
So thanks very much. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the Energy Futures Task Force and the receipt sort of their formal report. Ms. Hill and Ms. Woodward, are you the two folks that are going to come talk with us?
Yep. Lisa's gonna help with the PowerPoint.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.
Okay,
Well, welcome. For the record, please introduce yourselves.
I am Pam Hill. Whoops. Right.
You plugged in already, it's just gonna take a second for it.
This one's.
Pam Hill, how's that? I'm the chair of the Energy Future Task Force, and with me are other members of the task force, Elise Woodward, Dan Gainsborough, Brian Bowles, Wally Johnston, and I think the only one of us who's not here tonight is John Dalton. We're here to formally present the final report of the task force to the select board and to answer any questions you might have. By the way, that beautiful picture is courtesy of Steve, and it actually is it's a drone or something. It's actually in motion, and it takes you over our beautiful town, and it's a lovely.
Say the FCC, the FAA regulations were not in effect at the time. So it's not breaking the law.
It's even more impressive when you see it in motion. Anyway, thank you for that. We actually delivered the report on March 16th, but this is our formal presentation. And since we were here a couple of months ago to give you a preview, some of what I say may sound familiar, but to the extent that it is, we think that redundancy is okay. And for those of you who are watching or are in the room and don't know about us, the task force was formed by the select board in early 2016. We've been meeting regularly since April. In essence, the select board charged the task force with creating a framework for the design and implementation of a town-wide energy plan that will minimize Concord's carbon footprint and that will be sustainable in the near and long-term future. The framework is importantly to include long-term goals, and the report that is the subject of this presentation tonight is the product of our fact-finding, our public outreach, which was significant, and our deliberations. It's comprised of goals and recommendations with supporting information and rationale. First, some words of thanks to the select board. As I think I said the last time I was here, the opportunity to work on this has been incredibly valuable and a wonderful experience for us to help engage in these extremely important issues. And speaking for myself, as chair, it's been a great experience, and I think speaking for all of us, we just thank you for the opportunity. To the members of the task force, not including me, I want publicly to convey my deep appreciation for the work that you all have done. It is important to the Select Board to know that everyone, Elise Woodward, John Dalton, Brian Folds, Dan Gainsborough, and Wally Johnson, have all contributed greatly to this effort. During the months that we worked together, although we didn't always share the same points of view, and we really didn't, it was a rich exchange. We enjoyed a strong collaboration that deepened over time, and each person had different expertise and perspectives that were complementary and very valuable. Everybody pulled a laboring oar. So I thank my 5 colleagues. To members of the public, if only everyone in Concord could have observed and benefited from, as did the task force, the thoughtful, useful, sophisticated, sustained participation of many members of the public. Concord is rich in its citizens. And for those of you who have worked collaboratively with people in Concord, you know what I'm saying. It's just a very wonderful thing. So thanks to the people who spoke at our meetings, sent us emails, and offered help all along the way. Greatly appreciated. Why consider our energy future? Before getting into the report itself, it's important to answer that question. There are several reasons, and they are all embedded in the charge that you gave us. So you all know the answers, I'm sure, but I think it's worth spelling them out. First, as you know, climate change is recognized globally as an immediate and an existential threat to our planet. Countries, states, and municipalities all over the world are taking action to address it. Affluent communities in industrialized nations, communities like Concord, are ultimately the main sources of the greenhouse gases in our ambient air, the main causes of climate change. So we have a particular responsibility to step up. Second, Concord can be positioned to play a leadership role in the years ahead, although we are not a climate change leader now. Third, to be a leader, Concord needs to establish reliable, equitable, and environmentally sound energy plans. The Select Board established the task force to create goals and a framework for such a plan. The plan needs to assure the long-term viability of the Concord Municipal Light Plant, and it needs to be integrated into CMLP's strategic planning and into the town's comprehensive long-range plan, both of which are underway. So it's opportune to harvest this information now to make it a participating feature of these endeavors. Fourth, there is a moral imperative here. It is the urgent need to act now to protect future generations, including our children and grandchildren who will suffer the consequences of climate change far more acutely than we will. And that's what makes this a particularly difficult thing, I think, because it's hard to get your hands around something that you don't feel immediately and personally, like a fire in your house. Next slide. Our recommendations have been guided by 4 ideas. 1, international commitments for greenhouse gas reduction expressed in the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the Massachusetts goals for greenhouse gas reduction expressed in the 2008 Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act. Second, a commitment to bold approaches and actions to achieve greenhouse gas reductions consistent with the urgency of the current global climate crisis and with Concord's long history of leadership and of stewardship of our natural world. And I will say that the encouragement to be bold came at us over and over again from public comments. And of course, I think we felt it ourselves. Third, a recognition that Concord is part of and should actively contribute to the fast-paced global, national, state, and municipal transformation from an energy economy powered by fossil fuels to an economy powered by clean energy. And finally, a commitment to Concord's already established sustainability principles. So our goals, these are and they are in fulfillment of the select board's specific charge to, quote, identify short-term and long-term goals. So we did it. And it was a pleasure. They are a 25% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2020, an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by 50/50. Those are the two basic goals. They're town-wide, which is important, and they are applicable to all sectors, which is also important. They come straight from the Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act. The baseline is 2008, and in fact, a key step to reducing the carbon footprint of Concord is establishing a baseline. The Concord's energy data has been tracked since 2008 as the baseline for the town's green communities designation, so we have a start. And this is analogous to the 2008 baselines prescribed in the Global Warming Solutions Act. The task force anticipates, because this is an important sort of foundational piece of work to be done, that a new director position would confirm the completeness of this baseline and identify milestones for measuring progress toward meeting the strategic goals of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Those were the goals. Now we come to the recommended immediate next steps. The first one is to issue a policy statement to establish decreasing emissions as a criterion in all town decisions. Such a directive or policy does not yet exist, and there are actually competing values in town that make it difficult to implant these values into decision-making. So we believe it's important to have a policy statement townwide that helps individual committees and boards, use these goals in their thinking. Second, to hire a director of energy or some other title and a consultant to assist the director, both of whom would be accountable to the town manager, to guide the town in designing and implementing a sustainable energy future consistent with the recommendations in the report. Third, to appoint a new advisory group to assist the town manager, the energy director, and the consultant. And we think this is important, not because we like proliferating committees, but in situations such as this, where you have an emergent policy idea and a complex one that will have effects on everyone, that it's very important to have citizens presenting the collective views of the citizens and helping on policy issues. And fourth, to integrate the goals and recommendations of the task force report into the current strategic planning effort going on at CMLP and the comprehensive long-range plan also currently underway. That's the frame of what we were asking you and trying to fulfill the charge that you gave us. Stepping back a little bit to give you some of how we got there, the important element of public outreach and public participation comes up. It was very important in your charge to us, and we took all the comments we received very seriously, and there were many. We held 3 public meetings, each attended by probably 50 people or more. One of them was recently held on April 29th. It was an informational meeting after the final report had been submitted. Importantly, through the work of Dan Gainsborough and John Dalton, members of the task force, we maintained close contact with CMLP. We were very grateful for the participation at our meetings of CMLP's liaison, Laura Scott, who is here. Laura attended every single one of our meetings and provided excellent comments. And we appreciated Dave Wood's attendance at one of our task force meetings. And so we felt that we had a good interaction with that very key component of our effort. We interviewed 7 key stakeholders. We did a townwide automated survey. We established an email account and received over 100 excellent comments from the public. Members of the public also attended virtually every task force meeting and made many excellent comments there. Finally, the task force made a presentation at the February 27th Finance Committee hearing and at the March 6th Select Board meeting. I report all of this mostly to really burrow into the assistance we got from many, many voices and how helpful those voices were. Another thing that the select board asked of us was to provide context. One of your charge was to review current energy and sustainability planning activities in Concord and in other communities, which we did, and a few points bear emphasis. First, Concord has laid a good foundation for the steps the task force recommends. This foundation includes Concord's sustainability principles, which I've mentioned, and which have been used as a filter for decision-making by town officials and which have raised general citizens' awareness of the importance of making sustainable choices. It also includes many initiatives by Concord citizens, such as the Concord Climate Action Network, and activities within the town's government structure, such as Concord's Sustainable Energy Committee. Second, Concord is by no means alone in our efforts to address our energy future, and this is important too. Many, many other communities in Massachusetts and around the country are already far ahead of Concord in finding a path to greenhouse gas reductions. Indeed, there's a rising tide in Massachusetts itself, focusing on initiatives similar to the recommendations that we're at the proposal stage of. For example, in May 2015, the 14 Massachusetts cities and towns of the Metropolitan Mayors Coalition pledged to achieve net zero carbon-free status by 2050 with interim steps. Locally, Lexington, Acton, Cambridge, Somerville, and Boston all have developed climate action plans to address these same goals. There are 41 communities with municipal light plants, of which we are one, and they are considering decarbonization strategies. Several communities across the United States have also adopted net zero or other non-emitting electrical supplies, such as Fort Collins, Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, other places. And there are countries around the world and cities around the world doing the same thing. Moreover, new proposed legislation is filed in the Massachusetts legislature each session with goals of deriving all energy from renewable resources. This is a happening situation that we need to join with others on. In short, Concord is in a good position to catch up and even become a leader in reducing our carbon emissions and related temperature rise, but we're not there yet. It is the hope of the task force that soon Concord will join communities at the forefront of greenhouse gas reduction efforts and even become a leader among them. Third, it is clear that success requires whole systems thinking and planning. So the task force recommends that the town take an integrated approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, not only from the energy sector, although we do focus on CMLP, but on all sectors, and also engage the public in determining opportunities for individual action. The task force recommendation that the town create a director-level position will enable such an integrated approach. In essence, that is why you need a director-level position, we believe. Which brings us to the next slide. This is really just to emphasize the sector's importance, other than energy, and that going forward, no doubt the director and people working with the director are going to be working with multiple sectors, and I'll just read them off. Agriculture, the built environment, commercial, energy, health, safety, and welfare, land use planning and management, municipal procurement, transportation, waste management, water management, and I'm sure there are others. Now on to the Concord Municipal Light Plant, which plays a special role. The work of the task force focused largely on the important contributions of the light plant. And we, as I said, worked closely with CMLP and we're grateful for their participation in our thinking. Because Concord has control of the power purchase portfolio at CMLP, it's in a very strong position to advance the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity it sells to its customers in all sectors. In fact, it's this rationale that forms the key basis of the task force recommendations for the energy sector. Moreover, and importantly, the select board charge, which we did follow closely, specifically asked the task force to consider the following question. how can or should the mission of CMLP evolve to address new market competition, emerging opportunities, and new business models for operation? In light of this context, the task force encourages the town manager and the select board to work with and engage CMLP as a partner integrating greenhouse gas emission goals in its strategic planning. Actively engage with. Secondly, encourages the town manager and the select board to work with and engage the light board as a partner guiding the implementation of strategic goals. Because it's our appreciation, having gone through this, that it is hard to shift your paradigm, and you need to pull all the laboring oars, and the different leadership positions in town can help do that. So this is encouragement for you to do that. Specific recommendations with respect to CMLP are as follows: that CMLP develop a set of cost-effective energy efficiency incentives and measures that meet or exceed those offered by Massachusetts investor-owned utilities. It's an interesting exercise to compare what municipal utilities are doing and are required to do compared to the investor-owned utilities. That it converts CMLP's electricity supply to non-emitting resources with a target of achieving 100% from non-emitting resources by 2030. That CMLP consider alternatives that reduce barriers to adopting energy efficiency measures, of which currently there are some that we explain in our report. And that CMLP develop incentives to encourage users to switch from fossil fuels to electricity from clean energy for heating and for transportation. Measuring success. How do we do that? We think that there are 6 key elements, and they all kind of bubble up from what I just said. First, maintain CMLP as a critical asset to enable the town to achieve its greenhouse reduction goals. That's imperative. 2, integrate greenhouse gas emissions reductions in the CMLP planning process, which I've said now redundantly in this presentation, forgive me. And identify and implement a recognized methodology to track Concord's annual carbon emissions to measure progress towards reductions. To shift transportation and heating fuel to electricity generated by clean power. To engage all sectors in the systems planning, and to engage citizens to reduce emissions in personal choices. And this is perhaps one of the more difficult because it's not attached to some jurisdictional authority, but it's of course a key part of what we will be trying to do as a community in the future with the help of direction from my director, perhaps. Economic impact. That's something that might be of concern to some people, and we have tried to explain here what we think some of the costs and benefits will be, but this is not, of course, comprehensive. There will be, if you hire a director level position, one-time funding of $100,000 from free cash, we believe, to fund that position, focused on town-wide emissions reduction. The position is expected to become full-time after year 1 with town managers budgeting. That would be accompanied by one-time funding of $100,000 from free cash, I gather, for a consultant to assist the town manager and the director. In addition, we recognize that a commitment of 100% non-carbon emitting electricity by 2030 may increase rates over time. Although it is actually very hard to predict given the volatility of the energy market and developments politically, internationally, and otherwise, but we are of the opinion that we may see rate increases. But it is important, too, to note that Concord's rates, getting back to the IOUs and the municipally owned utilities, they're 25% lower than rates from investor-owned utilities. And that is because the clean energy procurement requirements that apply to investor-owned utilities simply don't apply to municipally owned utilities, which gives us a break. And that's something we should keep in mind as we try to enhance our contributions to greenhouse gas reductions. At the same time, conservation and planning efforts that build efficiencies, that save electricity and reduce costs are going to be a countervailing part of the equation. Finally, our investment will promote intergenerational economic equity. Again, a difficult concept, but a concept that is fundamentally the basis of the Paris Agreement. And we have, as a town, said we want to embrace the Paris Agreement, at least in the charge and certainly in the views of the task force. So keeping that in mind, there's little doubt among economists that the cost of addressing climate change will greatly increase over time and will become a crushing financial burden on future generations. In other words, it's cheaper to act now than to act later. And economists are in general agreement about that, I think. Oh, here we are at the warrant article. Next and last slide. The task force report doesn't recommend or even mention the warrant article. Article 51, which you see on the slide there. But it's a natural outgrowth of our report, seeking town support from the greenhouse gas reduction goals stated in the report and support for the director and consultant positions that the report recommends. In light of this, the task force might have more discussions about the report in the context of Article 51 at other board and committee meetings going forward. And with that, are we done? We're done. Thank you very much. That concludes our presentation. Do you have questions?
Nah.
No. We're done.
I've heard that before.
I know, I'm so
Let
sorry.
me,
Wish I
let
could
me
make it just an elegant
say a
variation.
few things and then ask for questions. I've given my colleagues here at the table a redrafted version
Oh,
of
yes,
this,
right.
which is not substantively any different, but it conforms to the language that the moderator required. So in the form of a motion, as opposed to this. This was what was printed in the warrant.
Yeah, well, may I just say something, in case there are people who are watching on television or something, but the red, it reflects language which was not in the original
Exactly.
thing in the green packet, yeah.
That's right, there
Yeah.
was amended language, which is the red,
Yeah.
that was shared with a number of constituencies in town to try to ensure that we have broad support for this. And that language is included in this, which I will ask Andrew to post in the morning. But it just puts it in the form of for example, at town meeting, instead of say to appropriate and transfer from funds available in the treasury, free cash, and you get rid of this sum or any other sum, it's that amount of money. That's that kind of
stuff.
that kind of trick. So, having said that, the first order of business is to thank you and your committee. Alice and I were fortunate enough to be liaisons and attended not all, but many, many of your meetings. And we know how hard and diligently you work to get your arms around a very, very complicated issue.
Can I interrupt there?
I'm sorry?
Can I interrupt you and just say
Yes, you did.
there's another item? Here I go. One of the thanks I failed to give is a specific thanks to you and Alice.
Well, that's why I mentioned it.
I know, you were substantive, good comments, busy people you are, and it was very, very valuable to have you both there, and
It was valuable to us too, in the same sense that you said it was valuable being on the committee. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
You understood even more the complexity of the issue. And I came away from it with the conclusion that it would be a profound failure of citizenship not to address this issue. And so I'm grateful to you personally for the work that the committee did. And for, you were correct, all of the citizens and groups within the town who were diligent in making comments and providing with information. If you folks at home haven't had a chance to read the report, it's, this big report, and not only is the report big, but the appendices have lots of stuff in it too. So I mean, this is really a comprehensive effort, and I'm very hopeful that we can go forward. If you've read the article, you'll see that the new position, if it's approved by the town, and the consultant will essentially try to take this work and turn it into an operational plan for the town. So we have specific things to do to try to accomplish these goals. So to you and your committee, and to all the citizens who participated, you did good work on behalf of the town, and I hope we can move forward with this. So questions from them?
I'm just curious as to the new advisory group that you're recommending. Do you have any specifics in terms of how many, what type of backgrounds people should have for that group? Because that seems to me to be a pretty important group.
No, I think, and I'm glad you asked the question, and frankly, I think it's important to leave that judgment perhaps to others than us, but I do think we have ideas. One important idea is membership by the school committee. I don't know if Wally wants to talk to the role of the schools, as you know, is, especially the regional high school, is complicated because of its separate jurisdiction.
Is there a particular scientific some expertise that you think might be very helpful, or is it a broader kind of
We didn't
political-
address that, but I have to say that having now been fortunate to be in the company of some experts on energy work, John Dalton, Dan is a developer who does that kind of
Just for
work.
the record, John has joined us.
Oh, John, oh, there you are, you got here on your bike. There you go. Clearly, I think probably you would want to have some legal skills, you'd want energy expertise, you'd want dedicated, citizen representation in a member at least. The schools need to be represented in this, but I don't think we enumerated anything, and I would turn to my fellow members of.
I think you're right. I think the other thing that I would offer is,
And you have to
sorry. I think the other thing I might offer is having.
tell us who you are.
Dan Gangsborough, a member of the Energy Futures Task Force, and live at Lowell Road. Just building on what Pam said, I think, and having been challenged before working in big environments, trying to do difficult things, I think it would also be beneficial to have somebody who actually has implementation experience and sort of coalition building, at least a person.
Thank you. I know Senator Barrett has a carbon fee bill before, and it seems to be gaining some momentum. And that seems to me to be something that probably we should be assisting and helping to see if we can bring that to fruition.
And from our public meetings, we know that there are many citizens in Concord that have the economic expertise and the analytic expertise that would be useful in this realm as well.
I think those suggestions would be very helpful to the board.
That's an excellent point. I think we just shied away from being too prescriptive.
That's
and,
fine.
And
Concord's, of course, really lucky that no matter what expertise we think we need on an advisory committee, we'll be able to find it right around the corner or down the street. So it's
one of the things picking on what you said, which I think is a key point. We touch on the idea of being leaders in helping move state legislation, and I think that we shouldn't shy away from that. So someone who can navigate in a way that helps us be part of the solution to some of the barriers that exist currently in state legislation, which sometimes we see in the zoning world or other land use worlds, that's a good thing, I think. So that's, if you started to brainstorm, expertise, that would be one I would think might be good.
To that point, you've referenced that while this is a laudable effort and exciting and I'm thrilled to see the results of the Energy Futures Task Force. We're not the advanced team here, that there are other towns and municipalities throughout the Commonwealth who have boldly stepped in front of this issue. Are there any that come to mind? I think that when people are looking at this, it helps to have something tangible. Are there any leaders, other towns that came up in front of the task force that struck a chord as?
So I would say that the communities that have the most comprehensive stance on this are not in Massachusetts.
Okay.
They're Austin, Texas, they're Fort Collins, Colorado,
Burlington.
Burlington, Vermont, San Francisco, Palo Alto. But within Massachusetts, Boston has very strong climate policy, many successful programs, underway. Other communities in Massachusetts have taken approach toward one facet. So Cambridge, for example, has a net zero bylaw for residential new construction. So they're seeking to address the built environment, in that regard. Lexington has a more had a climate plan of 2014, I believe, that had aspirational goals, but I can't tell you precisely how much progress they've made toward that, although Lexington is interested in sharing consultant with Concord, and so that may be one way to accelerate our work by teaming with Lexington. And I would say that is the other aspect of this warrant article. These fundings, one-time funding from free cash, are really seen as a way to accelerate the work rather than waiting for another fiscal year to build this into the town manager's budget. So that's why they're considered to be short-term, funding. And it actually would give, if this article were to pass, it would give the town manager a fair amount of discretion on the sequence of hiring a consultant or a director position, whether to stair-step those expenditures over several fiscal years, and so it would be beneficial in that regard.
And do other towns have that director position? I assume this not.
And yes, Somerville has a director of sustainability position. Lexington has, I think, is also seeking a director of sustainability. I don't believe Acton has a director position, but they do have the town-wide metrics for decision-making relative to the climate change and sustainability. So there are different flavors of it, but there is progress across the country. And San Francisco, for example, is working on a zero waste initiative by 2020, which is quite, it's well underway, but it's very innovative, bold, yes, yes.
That would be truly a systems project.
Yes, that is a systems project.
A couple, just on the leadership piece, I personally hope that we become a voice and a leader nationally, if not internationally. And I'm optimistic partly because, I can't think of another way to put it, but there is an enormous amount of pent-up intellect, energy, and knowledge that we observed among the citizens we worked with and just the existent expertise in town. And it is pent up. And I think that if it were directed, we would, I think, see wonderful things happen. I also think that in the current national climate, states and municipalities are stepping up a lot more, and that will be where much of the action will be in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So I think we have a very nice confluence of opportunity here with our people and with the context we're in right now.
Other questions?
I just think we have an enormous opportunity with the municipal light plan to affect a change, because we should be much more nimble and flexible to meet the demand that the future energy calls for. And I think we're blessed in that way, that we have the ability to work closely with CMLP, and I'm glad to see that you guys have met so often. Laura, I know, has been to at least every meeting that I've been to, and probably more, with the task force, and I think that's a sign of us trying to work collaboratively to build a future that we all can see.
And the Life Plan Board has discussed this on a number of occasions, most recently just at their last meeting.
Wally would like to say something.
Yes, Wally.
Wally Johnston, 1479 Main Street, member of the Energy Future Task Force and also chair of the Concord School Committee. A lot of what we've talked about, and it's sort of this sending things out into the world. Every year we send a group of kids out into the world as incoming freshmen at colleges, and they do well, and they have big plans. And I think the things that we can do, some of which we've already done at the good graces of the town, we have some phenomenal school buildings, and each built has progressively been more energy efficient to the high school, which is extraordinary. And in the report, there are some things about the energy savings, but even the middle schools, which we're currently looking at long-term feasibility of, we've made investments there that have shown really some of the things we're talking about, that away from the CMLP environment, that we'll want to focus on if we go forward with this initiative. But we also have all these students in these schools that both can provide some input. They can, we've got earth sciences classes, we've got the environmental club, we've got the weather club. These clubs, the weather club goes and competes nationally with colleges. So there's great resources. The community ed is within the schools. So, and I don't think I have to sell the idea that there should be a school person of some sort on a follow-on committee. But there are definitely many opportunities through the schools, both as examples of what can be done because of the investments the town has made in those buildings, and the opportunities to educate both those students and the community and others through that process. So, thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Wally.
I just wanted to thank the task force and for their boldness. I think setting those high expectations and goals for the town is definitely a really good move to make us really reach for high aspirations. I also like to thank the Light Plan for being so agile and flexible to work with this. I'm one of those paradigm guys who really appreciated what the Light Plan offered the town and was very nervous about, don't want to mess with something that's working very well, but I think it's a reflection of your considerations. And what's the term of the general public in the meetings? You guys had a term about public comment?
Did we?
I don't know. I think it was something. It was a joke. But
We talked about the public.
the public, that's what it was. It was just like this general term.
Members of the public,
Yeah.
as if it were, and that caused some back and forth joking, yeah.
Yeah, but the boldness is what I really appreciate about it, because it really, you have to really act on that right away, like Elise was saying, and I think that's the best way to approach this, so, thank you.
I assume that the report will be available both online and also probably a hard copy at the library. It does take more than a 10-minute sit-down plan.
That's a good idea.
Actually, I was gonna ask if I think the Estabrook Woods website has not only its report, but it has the presentation that was made, like this one, and we could put this presentation and the slides on our website if you thought that made sense.
That would be very helpful.
But I also think it's a good idea to have a print copy available, or more than one, at the library, if we were interested in reading it.
Not everybody likes
We
to
should even
study a
have one
screen.
available here
Yeah.
in the townhouse. I think
I think it's a
that would
good
be
idea.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how little I knew about.
CMRPC.
Scratch the surface and there's.
Actually, Elise and I were talking one day, and Elise said it is like peeling an onion. I mean, it just keeps getting more and more interesting, and
We're lucky to have forest, and the number of trees probably in this town are more than neighboring towns. And they do a lot to assist in this effort.
oh yeah, carbon sinks.
And just let me also say that I've been told by the moderator, even with the changes in the language that I talked about, the motion is longer than 100 words. Right. And the consequence of that is that there will be a handout at town meeting because it gets dense on the screen. So we'll take responsibility for making sure that that occurs. But you might think about a question and answer Q&A.
FAQ.
FA, yeah.
Yeah, that
Actually,
might
we
be.
have a draft that we're working on, and we just
Yeah.
we're gonna leave it a little
And
later.
I'm ordinarily with the receipt of a final report, we would dissolve the committee with our thanks. You get our thanks, but you don't get the dissolution. Nice try.
Yeah, we
I think she
understand.
tried to walk away before.
Because we want to, at town meeting, the way we will present this to the citizens is I will move the motion, but I will quickly, get off the stage there so that you folks can come up and go through the substance. So I want you still constituted as a committee, so we'll disband you at the end of,
The end of town meeting.
at the, well, some.
You could vote in advance.
No, no, nice try.
Not to be effective until the.
This is not an
Now,
EFTM.
we'll see how you do first.
Just saying that.
Other questions from the board? Are there questions or comments that, because there are so many people participated in this, if you have a comment or a question you want to make, I would be happy to entertain it.
Ready?
Well, again,
I have a question. But I think you and Elise may have answered it, but you are not voting on accepting the report. You're going to.
we've accepted your report with our
And you do
profound
that
thanks.
through a formal vote, or you don't?
We will later this evening or at another select board meeting before town meeting,
Yeah.
take a formal position on the article. We have not done that.
Not on the
See,
article, you won't vote on accepting the report,
No, we accepted your
Doesn't require a vote.
report. I don't think we need
Okay.
to. You'd like us to, or you want to have all over?
Fine. Just curious what the.
Bosha?
Just to clarify, just a quick
Nope, no,
comment.
no.
You've got Pooja Cookman, 94 Hubbard Street, and member of Mothers Out Front here in Concord. And just first of all, thank everybody for this. It's kind of very exciting for us to see this happening. After withdrawing our motion last year on the net zero piece, so thank you very much. And I did want to note that Lexington did adopt net zero, and they do have a task force up and running, and they do have consultants who are helping on both the facilitation and the technical side. And one of the really great things we have here in Concord, as you all are talking about, is the light plant. And that does make us unique. And the towns Elise was mentioning prior, Palo Alto, et cetera, they have light plants as well. And so they're doing very interesting things from a business perspective. But here in Concord, we have the ability to do the light plant piece plus the other parts of other sectors in town, which really gives us a unique position for those 41 other towns in Massachusetts that have a light plant and want to do other things. So I just really want to reiterate that piece
Appreciate
of
it.
it. And thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bishop. And Pam, thanks again.
Oh,
Yeah,
Great-
pleasure.
grateful to
Thank you
you
so
for
much.
our- All right. The next item on the agenda for us this evening is the Concord Housing Development Corporation request. This is with respect to the Junction Village project. The motion that will be on the floor tonight is just to make a formal request for local preference for the Junction Village project. As the town manager reported, the planning board is going to deal with that tomorrow night. And of course, it's Article 30, that's the Junction Village article. It's a combination of free cash use and CPC funding for it. But this motion tonight is for us to request a local preference, which would amount to a total of 58 units that would be Concord preference during the initial period. It's 30%, it's 30 units with the 43 low-income units and 70% of the moderate income units. So it's a total of 58 units, and that will just be the formal request that we will make.
And this request is necessary because of the state.
Yes. And we don't need to make a request, but I think Concord preference has been a subject of, I wouldn't say concern, but a subject that's been brought up. And so we want to make sure that, or the planning board could do this, or ZBA could do it as well, but I think since the select board has this article coming to town meeting, we should take the initiative and get this done, so we can get that out of the way. While we're on this subject, I can also say that the memorandum of understanding that we had talked about, memorandum of agreement rather, the town manager and I have sent that off to our attorneys, and we've had a meeting to discuss the issues. I think it would be fair to say, correct me if I overstate it, they didn't see any problems with it, and we're anticipating that it will come back relatively soon.
This week.
And then I'll be able to, once it comes back from the lawyers, we'll be able to make it a public document, and then we will seek the signatures from the Housing Corporation and from the Grantham Group. And
That document would be, become public and be on our website.
Absolutely. As soon as we get it back from the lawyers, I will, we'll make it public, and then I will seek out the signatures of the Housing Corporation and the Development Group. We were able to get everything in there that we had anticipated with two last-minute changes. One, a positive one, the Finance Committee had wanted a statement in there that the town would not request any additional funds to support this project. And as the folks here from the Finance Committee remember, I said I didn't think we could do that because I didn't think we had the authority to bind future town meetings. So we flipped it essentially and put in there the statement that the developer wouldn't request any additional funds from, so he can bind himself, right? So, and that was in there. And then the one thing that we weren't able to get exactly the way we wanted is we were trying to make sure that Concord's money was put in at the last possible minute. And the initial draft that I had put together was that we would put Concord's money in only when there was an occupancy permit. That would have required the builder to essentially get some short-term financing. He said he couldn't do that, but he committed to try, but he did commit to no more than half of Concord's money would go before an occupancy permit. And then I'm not going to go over all the other details, but it had to do with additional cost of construction and what we had already talked about. So as soon as I get it back from the lawyers, we'll make it public, we'll get it signed. Hopefully we'll get that done before town meeting. That's the hope. So back to the issue before us, though, I would entertain a motion to request this local preference.
I move to request local preference in the Junction Village development and to instruct the ZBA to include the local preference as a condition in the 40B comprehensive permit to the fullest extent of the law.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. And now the next order of business is we are going to take up where we left off. If you don't want to hang around, I'll pause and talk slowly. We're going to take up positions on the remaining warrant articles that we haven't quite finished with. But before I do that, I had written to you all about a potential meeting on April 12th. Are you with me here?
Yeah.
Because we have a public hearing for the special town meeting that evening, and I was thinking we could convene at the end of the public hearing and deal with those warrant articles. So is that agreeable to
Did you
everybody?
say after the public hearing? I thought I said before the public hearing.
Well, if I said before, that's Jane's fault.
Obviously.
I made a mistake. It'd be after. We wouldn't have a public hearing until after, so
Right.
I must have just.
And it should be a relatively brief hearing with just the 3 articles on there.
Well, but let me complicate the matter. There have been some articles that we haven't taken up yet because there were still developments going on. For example, the supplemental budget for the regional high school, I know the administration is continuing to try to close that gap and possibly not to even do that. So that's an article that we could put off until the 12th if we want to give them more time to do it. I don't have any strong preference. And I will tell you that the petitioners have informed me that Article 28 will not be moved. And I've written to you as well on that, that we will work, it's my initiative, but we will work to put together an administrative policy with respect to open space that I think will do the job that they had wanted without having to go to town meeting. So, you have the articles in front of you. Essentially, they are the 3 school budgets and then some petition articles. So before we do this, do we want to think about postponing?
The schools?
Well, I don't think there's going to be any additional movement, I don't know, but on the public school or the regional high school budgets, it's the supplemental one that I think they're still working on, as near as I know. So we could just postpone Article 14 until April 12th and see if they've been able to close that gap. Now, the Finance Committee have they taken a position on the supplemental yet? You haven't, have you?
No, we'll,
The 13th.
we'll discuss it on the 13th.
13th.
And hope that the schools can update us
Yeah.
on any financial.
So I'd suggest that we postpone that.
I would agree with that.
Okay. All right, so then the articles that we can try to deal with this evening. First is the Concord School budget. Article 13, and this is a budget that currently speaking is not conforming to the guideline, right?
Correct.
And are they, Linda, could you tell me, are they still working to try to close that gap as well? Can you, I'm sorry, but we'll get in trouble.
Linda Miller, here Main Street, chair of the Finance Committee. The Concord Public School budget does not conform currently. There's non-conformance between the article as written and submitted by the school committee and the recommendation from the Finance Committee. I have not been given an update in terms of any movement there. So I cannot, and I can't speak for the school committee. I can say that the Finance Committee has not revisited the issue either, but I'm not expecting. I'm sorry, this Finance Committee has not revisited the issue, and I do not anticipate it do that.
But is it your understanding or your knowledge that they're still working to conform their budget to the Finance Committee guideline?
That is not my understanding.
That's not your
But that's more of a lack of information than being
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. So if we wanted to, we could push that one to the 12th as well. I'd like to give them as much time as possible to be in conformance. Finance committee worked very hard, and so does the school committee.
I guess my question in my first year is, if the budget did not pass at town meeting and we voted not in favor, what were the repercussions, what would happen with the school budget?
I moved to Newton. Chris, can you?
For the region, they would be presumed to have a budget equal to the current year. So they could begin to spend in the month of July, they could spend 1/12 of what they were budgeted in the current year.
But they usually, in the presentation, they list like what they would take out of the budget.
So that's if the budget's rejected completely, but more likely it would be a certain amount might be reduced, the budget might be reduced by a
The
certain
other complicating factor is, so you could address this for us too, if we would somehow not approve it, or it was approved at a different number, and Carlisle approved it for the regional district at a original number, then there's some other confluence of stuff that has to happen.
Yes.
All right, so what you're thinking about
I
waiting
think it
until...
makes sense to put it off.
All right, let's do that. I'd like to give them whatever. All right.
At least another week.
So the regional budget, though, is conforming to, is in conformance with a guideline from the finance committee.
Correct, though it's different than what.
Right.
So we have a copy of.
I don't know if we have a copy.
The most recent?
Of the most recent, that's the.
I do not have that.
I probably do here.
Where's their budget number?
16.
Okay, yes, regional, if I'm reading it correctly, the regional one now is $21,599,072.
It's including the debt.
That includes the debt. Okay. I move affirmative action on Article 16, the Concord Carlisle Regional High School budget, whose Concord portion would be $21,599,072.
So second.
I second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so then, just for the record, we are postponing until April 12th, the Articles 13 and Article 14. So next is petitioner article, Article 20, the resolution of money in politics.
I move affirmative action on Article 20, resolution reducing the influence of money in politics.
Second.
I'd like to just discuss that. I'm against this article because I think that it's far too broad and specific in terms of calling for public funding of elections. I don't think there's been a lot of thought in terms of other mechanisms that can be used, and I just think that it's just too broad for my taste.
Others? You can point us, if you can, Tom, to the language.
Well, I think regulating it, increasing, let's see, well, preventing elected representatives and some senior staff from negotiating jobs, barring them from all lobbying activity for 5 years after. I'm not convinced that's a good one. Let's see. Empowering all voters through a publicly funded election system. I just, the cost of that and how that is going to be implemented, I just think is worrisome. When we had 14 or 16 people up on the stage running for president on the Republican Party last, time around, and are we going to be, funding all of them at what level? How many people are going to be running for these offices? I think we run into problems.
Okay. Other thoughts?
So I look at this article as one that is aspirational in its goals,
Yeah.
and it directs us to work with our own elected officials to do something at a state level. So I feel that as it's a non-binding article on the operations of our town government, I see no harm in promoting a better and revised system of funding public elections. But it puts the onus on that on others, with us requesting that the conversation be had by our local elected officials at the state level.
I just think very often the best of intentions have unintended consequences that I'm not sure if I were an elected official and a town votes this, how I'm going to interpret what that means. I have no problem with individuals going to the elected officials and saying, this is my position, this is why I want it, or getting a group together to do so. But I think for the whole town to take a position, I'm not happy with it.
So it is the right of any citizen to bring a petition to town meeting.
Yeah.
And on that alone, I think it has merit, whether you disagree with what it says. I should mention that our board doesn't always have to vote unanimously
Absolutely.
in any one position on a warrant article. So I'm not going to attempt to change your point of view. I just want to make sure that we understand that this is the citizens of town meeting would decide whether this is reasonable or too broad to ever be implementable. But I'm just reiterating that what it says is that it compels the town to work with our elected officials towards this goal. And it's out of our hands at that point. It's an advisory capacity to our elected officials at the will of town meeting ask that this proclamation become part of their conversation at the state level.
But
And it's on that ground that I would support this measure.
I think I hear this is a dilemma, you know, on the one hand, the gestalt of it, I think it's great. But the last line in it is fairly unambiguous. To lead this effort to enact these initiatives in Massachusetts and in the Congress. For me, that's where I tend to come out where Tom is. If the resolution was didn't have specific things in it that needed to get done, and then the last sentence wasn't so directive. It doesn't say enact some of these initiatives or initiatives kind of like this or in support of the general nature of it. So
Our elected officials would have no reason to take this opinion
no, it's
over
not
any
their
other.
action,
It
but it's
becomes-
our action.
I was just to say that it's the will of town meeting that, if it's for voted affirmative action at town meeting, we are reporting a factual point of view that happened at town meeting. This was a citizen petition, it was voted favorably by whatever the percentage, if we know it, of voters. And we are instructed to let you know the outcome of that vote for you to take it under advisement as you work towards, some other system of funding elections.
Yep.
I mean, it's up to them to decide if
But
they'll
we're
take
being
that.
asked if we support it or not. That's all true. We could take no position and we'd still have to do what you explained.
We would still have to take.
Yeah. But
I think that Alice's point that these initiatives are aspirational, I think it's the practical, this is a casting a stage or sometimes you have to go broad in order to capture the center benefits. And I'm not as concerned about any one of these specific initiatives alone ending up keeping us captive at the state level. I think this is sort of that broad ask. And then if this takes a life of its own, we know it's gonna win it. We know it's gonna win it down. This is the big statement. What ends up is something else. So if we're not willing to take the big statement, we're taking a smaller statement to start if we're taking one at all.
I think if you take a big statement that's overbroad, you diminish the impact. Just my feeling. But
Right, I'm just-
I'm gonna vote for him, you know.
Absolutely.
But I respect the other side. I think that,
Well, the one countervailing point in the language of the article, Tom, is in the middle of it there, it's got words such as opposed to in a list.
yeah.
So I suppose a broad interpretation of it would be that here are some examples of things you could do that would be good,
Right.
but it isn't do these 9 things.
Yeah.
So, you know, so I think I could hang my hat on the such as and say, yeah, but don't pay any attention to that third one there, because that's really.
Well, that's when you could have a problem. I mean.
Well, I mean, we're not
that-
really saying do these 9
Yeah,
things.
it's
not
Giving
prescriptive.
examples, such as.
Mm-hmm.
I could buy the such as, but I did take your point. I mean, the intent, we all get the gestalt intent of this, but sometimes good intentions can run you into the. Other comments? Anybody else want to chime in? We want to vote? Is there a motion on the floor? There was.
So moved.
There was, and there's a second?
Do we have a motion, Deborah?
I think we
Oh,
did.
yeah, you did say motion, so, yeah.
All right, so how we're gonna vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed.
Let the record show it was 4-1 in favor of the resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next is Article 28, I told you is not going to be moved. Next is Article 30, Junction Village. Just a reminder that that's a two-part allocation of money. It's $350,000 this year in the Community Preservation Act. And clearly they intend to go back and ask for additional funds, and CPC knows about that, but there's no guarantee. And then $1 million in free cash.
What committees, have any committees made their,
Recommendation, the Finance Committee has not, the Planning Board is still
well, that's their.
Discuss it tomorrow.
their application.
Yeah.
The West Concord Advisory Committee, I think, voted in favor of it. I know the Housing Authority was going to vote on it, but I haven't heard from Linda if they have. And the league, I think the league is gonna discuss it on Friday. So I suspect they haven't taken a position on it yet. My personal point of view on it is this is something that we have put forward and we've spent a lot of time on it. I think I'd like to take a position on it now rather than waiting for other committees. They have their responsibilities, they'll carry them out. So I just assume.
I move affirmative action on Article 30, the appropriation recommendation for Junction Village Affordable Assisted Living Development in the amounts of $350,000 or any other sum from Concord Community Preservations Fund and $1 million from free cash.
Second. Is there other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous, thank you very much. Next article is Article 49. This is a petition article, home rule legislation for affordable housing. Phillips,
Finance Committee,
the Finance Committee voted no action, is that correct, Ms. Maria?
On the, I'm sorry, Article
49.
41.
I move affirmative action on Article 49. request for home rule legislation allowing Concord to adopt fees to finance affordable housing.
I'd like to discuss that.
That's what
I'm not in favor of
Time
that.
out. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second.
I'm not in favor of this. Again, I think this is one where I do agree with the goals, but I'm very concerned that this article would in fact counter to those goals. I think that it would lower the, one of the reasons we're able to have people in this town is we have a relatively low tax rate. And that's because the housing stock continues to increase. I think this would put a damper on that. And the annual taxes that we get come year after year. This is a one-time fee that I think would scare people away and would prevent, therefore, the increase in our tax base. I also think that these funds, if they're used to buy the lower end, you're creating a more of a demand on that side, which is going to continue to raise the price of those homes and have an adverse effect. So I think while the intention may be good, the result is going to have exactly what we don't want. So I'm against this.
Well, I think it's the total opposite. I think that as development continues, that's the housing type, that particular type of home, luxury level, large square footage, increases the average value of homes in this town so that affordable homes cannot ever be achieved. And I think that when we see what in various projects in town, what developers are willing to, or you see what they have to pay down to make a unit affordable, it's virtually impossible for our housing groups such as CHDC or the Housing Foundation to really make a dent in trying to maintain diversity. So I like, it's a lot of bold things today. I like the boldness of this article. I think it makes, it's reaching out and asking the town, if you really want to believe in this, are we really believing in affordable housing? Well, when you do your nice addition, we're not saying you can't, although you can't cut some trees down, but that's a whole nother article. You gotta make a contribution to keep the balance.
This could be accomplished by adding an additional 1% to the CPA, and then everybody is participating. If this is a benefit for everybody, it seems to me everybody should participate. This seems to me to be kind of attacking the notion that everybody's coming in and building a big house, and against the size as much as anything else. So I don't see this as totally affordable housing issue. If it were, let's have the whole town participate in it.
So my part of the discussion is understanding that this is the second year of a 3-year process, is that right? First was to request home rule petition. This is modeled after Sudbury's, is that right?
No.
This is a different,
This is No, this is modeled after, I don't think it's modeled after any other municipality's proposal.
So remind me of the process of home rule legislation allowing us to do this required this.
We would, if it was passed at town meeting, it would essentially instruct us to request the legislature to grant us the authority to do this. If they granted us the authority to do it, like the Article 48 on the current town warrant, then it would come back to the town for another affirmative vote.
Right, that's what I meant.
And then there would be, I believe, a general election that would have to follow it, just like Article 48. So it is a
3-year
independent
process.
of whether you support it or you don't support it. It's a complicated process.
So on the one hand, it's the start of a public discussion. Because you can't.
Well, yes, it is, but what's passed at town meeting is what goes to the legislature. And what the legislature approves is what comes back to the town. It is not, I don't mean you meant it this way, but it's not, gee, we want to do something in affordable housing, what do you think? It's a very specific proposal that they would approve, disapprove, or in fact, they can make amendments to it. They had some language concerns on what was Article 48 from what was sent in substantively. it didn't-
As could town meeting.
It's true.
Town
It can be
meeting could
moderated.
Right,
change,
this-
Right.
yeah, of course, well,
Right.
motions can be changed
Exactly.
at town meeting, but when if it was approved at town meeting and went to the legislature and they approved it, then if it comes back,
It's
there's
a lot
no
more.
fooling
Right,
around
yeah.
with that.
Yep.
Do you have another question?
No, that's good.
Well, I think you fellows have teed it up pretty effectively. The question is whether we would support something that, the way I would say what Steve said was, if you ask what is driving, aside from our own interest in having affordable housing in town, and Concord has a goal of achieving certain affordable housing, what will drive a change in the number of units we will need to have over time, that's driven by new construction and new housing stock in town. So the way I would say it is, while it is aimed at a particular group of people, not everybody, it is aimed at those people who are requiring the town to gain additional affordable units by adding to Concord's existing housing stock. So it's not just willy-nilly pointing at somebody and saying, you get to pay. It's, if a new construction comes in, that's 1/10 of a housing unit that we have to do. And if 10 new units come in, that's a housing unit we have to do.
But we are only targeting those that are 3,000 square feet and above.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
The other piece of which is it also ties into the housing production plans predictions. I mean, you know, it is a path where it's actually taking action at meeting some of the needs that have been identified in that. It may not be the only path, but it's an action.
I mean, it's definitely geared towards, in this particular article, is geared towards size or square footage. It seems like, you know, with our discussions about energy task force, it's like I foresee down the road energy being charged more for a family that's heating their house more than someone who owns a smaller house. So is that acceptable? I mean, it's the same thing. You're building something larger. You know, when is it not okay to do all? Are you going to do it some of the time, not all the time? You know, and
presumably, we're talking, if you're building a larger home, it's more often for a family rather than where the children have left the house and you could, you know, pare down to a smaller home. And it just strikes me that by doing this, you're putting a burden on younger families trying to come into Concord, which it's already an expensive thing to do. I think it's interesting that the Finance Committee voted as I took no action. So that says something to me as well.
well, I think it's more about how, if you don't see that separation happening, that gap becoming bigger, I don't know where we really stand in this town if we don't really believe that that's a problem. So I think we have to seriously consider every possible idea.
That's why I always think these are far better, these type of issues, far better to come before committees that can analyze and discuss and, you know, really go through them rather than getting a citizen petition that all of a sudden, you know, the 3,000 square foot was an arbitrary figure.
So that was mine. In fact, my hope was that that we could have this article not moved in exchange for doing what we did last year with respect to the two energy articles,
Right.
Mr. Folds and Mothers Out Front, recognizing it as an important issue for the town.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
if we don't do it, I mean, we're just being stupid, because we're gonna continue to face this, and get, you know, a group of citizens and the appropriate committees in town to come back to the town with, having considered all kinds of approaches.
Board of Assessors input, all of these.
But I was not successful in affecting that change.
And unfortunately, we don't have the option of choosing a different path for raising funds, as you suggested, a 1% increase in our
No,
RCC
but
fund.
I'll tell you, my
Makes sense.
personal view is I'm sorry with Tom here, this is important, but I think it's important to get it right, and I don't think this is right. I don't understand, I get 3,000, but why not 3,500, or why not 2,000? And why $35 a square foot, is that what it is, $35?
30, you would have got.
30, why that, where did that number come from? So I wish we could put a task force together like the Energy Futures Task Force, or I see a couple of people here from the P3 task force that we had to try to do that. So I think that's a better approach for the town. We ready to vote? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Opposed.
And that was a record 4-1 opposing the article. And I will state for the record that if this article was not passed at town meeting, I hope I can reach out to the petitioner and we can work together to try to put together.
I think that's an excellent.
To do that. All right, next is our, first of all, I screwed up. There's two additional articles that we had postponed from our last meeting. That was the Article 36, which was the zoning bylaw for professional offices in West Concord, and 39, the marijuana one. So even though 50 is the last one, 51 is the last one on our pit parade thought, we're gonna have yet two more that we need to contend with. So Article 51 is the Energy Task Force. You have the
So
one.
wait, let me ask, did you say if you want to take them?
No, we'll do 51 and then we'll do 36 and 39.
Okay.
So 51.
I move affirmative action on Article 51, the Concord's energy goals.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The record shows 5-0 in favor. Okay, now Article 36. Jane, you were the one who was concerned about that. Do you have any updates or?
I was concerned about being on the consent on its placement. And when I reached out to members of the planning board, their sense was they're happy to discuss it at town meeting. So I don't think it holds us up for taking a vote on it. It was about whether it was going to be discussed or not.
Okay.
So, I also met with the town planner to understand what the controversy is with them considering around this particular article. And while there, on the face of it, is very little controversy, this bylaw amendment felt like housekeeping, bringing this particular neighborhood in line with the West Concord Advisory Committee's goals for West Concord, and it was very much in alignment. There was one particular person who felt personally aggrieved by a potential outcome that may raise rents for a business. And if that's worthy of conversation at town meeting, that's fine. I felt that this was pulling it out of the consent calendar seems innocuous enough to do that and allow the petition, the person who opposed to bring a position to town meeting. But the controversy here seems a self-interest in one particular business enterprise that may or may not be forever in time.
I think the concern was the ability to talk about it.
Yeah, which seems reasonable to me.
All right.
Although I'm a little disturbed that an architect isn't allowed to open an office on the first floor.
Nothing
That-
personal.
I think it's exciting, the models, the drawings, but that's okay.
You can be on the second floor.
I move affirmative action on Article 36, zoning bylaw amendment, professional office.
I second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Article 39. This is the marijuana moratorium.
So-
Our question last time was, the state had postponed theirs, so this was really necessary?
So I also reached out and spoke with the town planner as well as the public health director on this one to understand what the timetables were. It seems very much in line that this is still a very important article for Alan warrant this year, because the timeframe just doesn't work with our town meeting schedule. For us to meet a deadline for proposing new zoning regulations, if that's what we choose to do, that allows marijuana dispensaries in certain neighborhoods. So the timing, for the mere fact that the timing doesn't work with our town meeting schedule, warrants this article being discussed at town meeting, and I feel it's an important article for us to be considering given the timeframes.
Do we have a motion on
There's
it?
also a similar position that was offered by the Mass Municipal Association and the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association just this week, saying many towns have decided to warrant article because the timeframe just doesn't work.
I move affirmative action on Article 39, zoning bylaw amendment, marijuana establishment temporary moratorium.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. All right, so that leaves us with Article 13 and Article 14 to take positions on, which we will do on April 12th following the public hearing. In addition to the three articles that are going to be on the special town meeting, the citizen petition article,
Disability Commission
Disability Commission, and then
Tele-
Article 20.
for telecommunications.
Technically. All right, thank you all very much.
So can we have a very brief discussion about whether there are any articles that we want to
That's
make?
That's what's next.
Oh, that's next. That's all part of the same.
What's
Sorry.
next is you'll recall in the handout that I provided at our meeting on the 27th, I had bolded those articles that I thought we would be advised to think about developing written opinions. I also wrote and asked if anybody had others that they wanted to put on the list, or if people had perspective about things they would like to participate in. Jane has volunteered to prepare remarks for Article 42 and 40. I will prepare remarks for Article, you want to do 51?
Yeah, I think we have the, on that one.
But I'm just going to introduce it. I'm going to do 51, I will do 30, and I will also do, where did it go? The means tested, I've been working with that committee, so
Okay.
I'll do those. So,
I'll do 20.
20, money and politics, all right, Steve, good. Preservation of open space isn't gonna be done. Home rule for affordable housing. We might want to think about preparing something for that. It still comes to town meeting, I think we ought to, since we're not taking a position, we ought to have something to say to the folks, right? Who would like to, would you like to do that? All right, Tom will do that one.
We're gonna sit back and kick their feet up.
No. What about, we've still got landfill remediation to do, you wanna do that?
Sure.
Okay. Alice will do that. And please now, if you, so Alice is gonna prepare Article 17, Jane is gonna do 42, I'm gonna do 48, Jane is gonna do 40, Steve is gonna do 20, I'm gonna do 30, Tom's gonna do 49, and I'm gonna do 51. And if you think of other articles that you think that would be important for us to have a position on, I hope you will let me know. And
You want to discuss 19?
oh, okay, thank you, yes, free cash, I don't think we need to have a position. What the moderator has agreed to do is we have a number of warrant articles that are going to ask for an allocation of free cash. We have the Church Street property, we have Junction Village, we have the Energy Futures Task Force, and we have the supplemental budget for the school committee. And so what the moderator has agreed to do is before Article 14, before Article 14, that's the first one that's going to use free cash. She's going to allow a small presentation. I don't know who yet, perhaps the finance director, I'm not sure who, but the finance director will explain free cash, what it is, how much we've got, what our goal is, what the uses are in town meeting. So we can, when we talk about the use of free cash, we can be talking about it with respect to a particular use and not worrying about free cash in general. So she's agreed to allow, I don't know how many minutes, but she's agreed to allow some time for the finance director, was the finance director,
Yes.
not finance director, to do that, all right? So please let me know if there are other articles you think we should be prepared to talk about. Okay, next, is that, any questions? Okay, next, public comments. Anybody want to make a public comment? Dory?
Thank you very much. Dory Keough, 51 MacArthur Road, and I have several questions.
Tell us who you are.
Yeah, yes, I did.
I didn't hear her.
No, I'm sorry.
Sure,
I don't want to shout into this thing either. Sorry. I have three quick questions. They're all about Article 30, which, as you have already voted to support, and this is not anything to do with your support, but some questions that have occurred to me over the past several days. I am wondering, in your MOA, I guess it's an MOA, there must be a difference between an MOU and an MOA.
This is an MOA.
Okay, I've got it clear on that one. But if there's no additional CPA money voted in the next couple of years, does your MOA address what would happen then? Because Grantham is expecting, I think, the figure of $2 million. So how is it possible?
All it has in there is that other than the money that they will ask for in subsequent years from the Community Preservation Committee, they will ask for no additional funds from the town.
But what I'm trying to say is if they don't get there'll be less CPA money next year and even less the following year. If they don't get the 350 and 300.
It's their problem, and they understand it's their problem.
Got it, okay, so it's 1350 that's the limit unless more is added. 1 million.
That's what this year is going to.
This
Yeah,
year.
1 year, and so there's
Next year,
nothing,
there will be an application in front of CPC.
right,
And the year after,
And-
whether it's granted or not,
Yeah.
I don't know.
but we're not obligated to make up that 650, the town. Okay, so there's no 2 million promise from the town. That's reassuring.
It gets voted every year.
Okay, no, that I would know, but I
We
just,
couldn't promise it.
no, I just didn't know if they might expect it to
What's
come from
question
more
two?
free cash. Number two is if the state doesn't grant the preference, what the ZBA requests of the Department of Community and Housing Development, okay? If they don't grant any Concord preference, what is that gonna do?
Well, those are state rules, so we don't have any way of saying, well, we're gonna do it anyway. So if they don't grant it.
No, I know that we can't
We don't
do
really
that.
have any recourse.
Would there be anything that you would consider about the fact, I don't know that a lot of us think that we're getting a lot for our money, whether it's 1.3 million or 2 million.
Let's don't argue the case. What's the question? You've got a question, so tell us what.
I have a question.
Good.
A lot of us, however, question this, and so what I'm trying to say is there a way to protect one benefit that comes to Concord residents from this is that you will get initial preference, possibly up to 56? 58, I beg your pardon, or possibly only 30, as we heard originally, or possibly now none.
According to the housing folks here in town, Ms. Ross, she has told me that these are almost always, I mean, they're granted as a matter of routine. She doesn't see any reason why it wouldn't be granted, but I don't, your question, I get your question. I don't think there is anything we can do. It's a state law, so it's not something we can say, well,
Okay,
we really want to have it.
okay.
We can ask Ms. Russ to give us some statistics on.
She's told me that they're virtually always granted.
What's interesting about that is that something that came out from them last fall was that they never granted preference, local preference, when there were tax credits involved. I presume that that's been changed. Okay. So my last question is this. You have said that you would be seeking the Grantham signatures before town meeting, that you hope that they would have the signatures before town meeting. What happens if they don't, if they're not signed?
That's for the town to do. I mean, the MOA is not, it's something that I thought of to do.
Which is a good idea.
To try to allay some concerns that folks had in the town. I've shared a draft of this with Grantham. They gave me some feedback. I incorporated what I could in it. I don't have any reason to believe they wouldn't sign it, but if they don't sign it, they don't sign it. I mean, people will know that, and people can take that into their thinking when they decide how to vote on Article 30.
Okay, so that could be brought to the public's attention that it has not been signed, if it hasn't been. I mean, they were slow to.
I would imagine
I would
it would.
expect it would be.
Yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely.
All
It's
right.
their risk.
Exactly, it is, and they've got a short time to
Well,
move it
it's our
through.
initiative, so I mean,
I know, but
let's,
I'm saying it's their,
yeah,
this
they
is
have
a
been-
public,
But the exchange has been good.
The
Right.
exchange
Okay,
has
good.
been good.
Okay, good,
They
because
had
I do
one
think it's a
concern,
protection.
which I raised early on. I had proposed that no money from the town until occupancy. They pushed back, and I pushed hard on that. But we came to what I think is the best we could do, which was no more than half the money. And that was the only substantive objection they had. So I don't anticipate a problem. But
Well,
It is what
we'll
it
know
is.
more in a couple of weeks to see.
I
Okay,
would certainly hope we do, and I'm working very hard to get this done.
good, okay,
before town
good. Well,
meeting.
thank you for your time.
I'll do
Thank
my
you.
best.
Thanks.
Other public comments? Committee liaison reports. Tom?
It's only been a week. I didn't go to only one meeting, and there are the Board of Assessors, Bruce Friedman is meeting, and the Historic Districts are meeting this coming week.
Right.
But that's all I got.
Jane?
this is my packed meeting week, so.
So, coming up.
Coming up, so.
Steve?
I gotta tell you, I attended the Recreation Committee meeting last week, and they're doing so much work over there. It's as if you hired like 50 more employees in that Hunt Gym office. Summer camp redesign, just covering different types of camps, different themed camps into August. It's more affordable than it's ever been. Unbelievable. The jazz concert in June.
Yeah, that's gonna be
Planning for
great.
that. The visitor center. All the extra Easter egg hunt. I just the meeting took a lot longer because of all the activities and I had all these questions. But what an exciting group over there right now.
Super.
Doing so much for the town.
It's made a big difference.
Yes.
It
Al?
really has.
So I attended the Magic Stormwater MS4
Thank you.
permits meeting.
Thank you for going.
It was well attended. Concord had the town engineer, the town
Public Works.
planner, yeah, it was very well attended. And it's a very complicated permit process, and MAPC is taking it under advisement how it would be better to share best practices among the magic communities to be able to tackle MS4 permits rather than each community trying to do it individually. It is very complicated, and water also knows no boundaries as water flows from one community to another. That sort of compels a coordinated effort to develop the MS4 permit rights. I attended the trustees of town donations, and I have a copy of the latest report, which you might be interested in seeing. But it was a very distressing meeting for the petitioners who came to meet. The Hugh Carlo Trust came asking for funds to help people in town who are unable to pay utility bills and other bills. And it was the opinion of the trustees that for them to maintain a good fiduciary responsibility as trustees of these funds, not to expend more than what is earned on the funds annually. Unfortunately, the past practice had been by other members of this board or other boards constituted as the trustees to spend some of the capital. And
Capital gains?
Capital gains.
Not capital.
No, they were spending down the trust funds, spending beyond what is being earned, their principal.
There's three levels. There's sort of interest kind of stuff. And then there are proceeds from transactions. So if you buy and sell stuff. And then there's the corpus. And it was the interest and the funds from transactions
That were being.
spent, yes.
So my understanding is that principal funds had been spent and that the principal amount had gone down and that they were unable to sustain that kind of funding levels for the Hugh Carlo Trust, and which was very disappointing to the members of the trust who are sitting there trying to figure it out. The same thing applied to the campership program, where there had been considerable money set aside for camp programs, and that funding has also been greatly reduced because of the funding limits of this year's gains from those funds. So I think that was disappointing news for both of those. And I think that Celia also came forward, the NRC director, with a proposal for funding some activities at the Chamberlain land, which was also not seen favorably because of a jurisdictional question of whether they could even under the trust documents do the kind of renovation and restoration work that she was looking for. I think
Was this on the bridge?
Yeah, determined that they could not use trust funds because the trust didn't extend into or over to the river and on the other side where the walkway was. It was a very difficult meeting for all those who were sitting in the
I'm
conversation.
meeting Wednesday, I think, with the finance director. I'm the liaison for the Hugh Cargill Trust.
Okay.
So I agreed to meet with the finance director to make sure I was totally up to speed on this stuff, and then meet with Hugh Cargill Trust. So
Okay.
I'm going to do that.
Okay.
Is that it?
I think that's probably.
I met with the major meeting this week was with the light plant board, the municipal light plant board, where the light plant board was preparing to take a position on Article 51. As part of their preparation, they invited some folks in to talk to them about potential rate impacts. And so they had folks come in and talk and then had a good discussion. And they light plant is meeting again on April 12th, I think that's right, where they will take a position on that article. So that will be that. I also represented us at the Air Force Base where the Chief of Staff of the Air Force came out and they had a reception for him. It was a very nice reception, and so that was enjoyable.
I thought we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that we had an election on Tuesday. And thanks to the voters in Concord, Mike is still sitting at this seat for another 3 years.
Even if they didn't vote for me, I'd still be sitting.
Well, going for it. as are 3 others in our town, including our town monitor, who will get to actually, present it or oversee her first annual town meeting, even though it's her second election.
So I am grateful to the voters who voted for me. I greatly appreciate it. It was a huge turnout.
It was an exhausting election for everyone. A lot of money spent.
That's why I was not.
I had to show up twice out
Miscellaneous correspondence, I have gotten a couple of pieces of correspondence about the proposed parking at the Apthorpe property, so it was good to hear from Ms. Kay tonight on that. And then I have invited the trustees of reservation to come talk to us, not about the Apthorpe property, although that's perfectly fine too, but with respect to the old man. So I've gotten a number of questions from folks just wanting to know what exactly is the plan there. So I thought, as we have done with Emerson Umbrella and the library and the museum, we could ask them to come talk to us, and then we'd have a little bit better sense of what was going on there. Chris, is there any update? Did the Acton selectmen file their?
I haven't heard that they filed it with the town clerk in Acton. I don't know the answer to that. It was expected within a week or so from the.
Is there a limit, or is there any?
No, they don't have a limit on when when they file it. The appeal period.
Right, our time starts when they file.
Right.
Okay.
And just let me remind everybody that we start our Patriots Day events. Start up this Saturday with the Miriam's Corner event at 1 o'clock. It's Saturday down at Miriam's Corner. And then the parade and everything is on the 17th, Monday the 17th at 9 o'clock. And finally, then April 19th is on a Wednesday, and that's the dawn salute at 6 o'clock out at the flagpole at the National Park. So those are the main activities that are coming up. So I hope everybody will plan to attend that. So we have a committee appointment, and I would be happy.
I move to appoint Burton Flint of 1643 Main Street to the Planning Board for an unexpired term to expire May 31st. That's not.
Yes, it is
2017. Okay.
We'll be talking about it.
I think you'll be back again. Right? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Move to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you all for coming.
So good.